Hi there. This is so exciting for me. My name is Sally Kettle and I'm an adventurer, but I'm also an ambassador for the London and South East region of Girl Guiding. So it's really cool to be able to join you in my tent for your adventures at home. First of all, so exciting. I'm in my garden, pot plant, right? So yeah, I'm in my garden and yeah, kind of camping out, and I thought I'd tell you some stories about the adventure stuff that I've been getting up to. Does that sound like a good idea? Yeah, you up for it? Cool. Okay, so when I first started adventuring, I decided I wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, the whole Atlantic, not just a little bit, but the whole thing, right? So I decided to row across the Atlantic, and I was going to go with my boyfriend. But unfortunately, he had a condition called epilepsy. Have you ever heard of it? Do you know what that is? It's kind of like your synapses inside your brain all fire off at once, and it's really, really unpleasant for the poor person who has epilepsy. Yeah, he decided he wanted to come with me on this epic challenge across the Atlantic Ocean, and we'd never rowed before or been at sea. And the only time we'd been on a boat was on a cross-channel ferry from Dover to Calais. Who gets really seasick? Because yeah, I do, really, really bad. Throw up everywhere. So are you wondering why I would decide to do it? Well, to be honest with you, I was sort of in my 20s and I wanted to change my life and do something really fun and exciting, and I thought that rowing across the Atlantic would be it, and it turned out to be completely life-changing. So my boyfriend and I trained up to go and row across the Atlantic, and we went to a place called La Gomera, which is in the Canary Islands, which is right by Africa. So we started there, and we were going to row in a wooden rowing boat, which sounds kind of a bit crazy, right? But it was an ocean rowing boat, so it had been built specifically for rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, right? And it's 8 meters long by 2 meters wide. Now, I think we've all been doing the social distancing, so we know what 2 meters is. So you can imagine how big 8 meters is. It's pretty small, right? Imagine being in a place about the size of your bathroom for however long it takes you to get across the Atlantic with your boyfriend or somebody you kind of know. Bit scary, right? Well, in fact, I didn't end up going with him in the end. And the reason why is because he had an epileptic seizure at sea. So unfortunately, it was a race we'd entered. We'd started the race in La Gomera in the Canary Islands. And unfortunately, 4 days in, he had an epileptic seizure. So I had to decide what I was going to do. Right, should I keep going with him and maybe he would get really poorly, or should we go back to the start and kind of disqualify ourselves? But you know what I decided to do? I got on something called a satellite phone. I don't know if you know what one of those is, right? It's a bit like a mobile phone, but you can use it anywhere in the world, because what it does is it sends a signal to satellites in the sky, unlike in mobile phones where they send them to masts and stuff. So yeah, I phoned my mum and asked her to come with me. Yep, I phoned my mother. I went, Mum, it's all going wrong. Will you come with me? Guess what Mum said? She said, yes. I said, good, bring more tea bags, right? So my mum was coming. So I met her back at La Gomera. So we rode back to La Gomera. And there she was. She was standing there in a pair of borrowed salopettes, right? Anybody know what salopettes are? They're kind of waterproof dungarees. And she had a bag of tea bags. She was ready to go. But my mum's a gardener, and she lives in a place called Northampton, which is about as far away from the sea as you can possibly get, right in the middle of the UK, right? And the people who organised the race asked my mum, have you ever rowed before? And she said no, so they disqualified us from the race. We came back to England, and we were really, really disappointed, because my boyfriend and I had spent nearly 2 years preparing to go, and there was absolutely no way that I wasn't going to go across the Atlantic Ocean. So I taught my mum how to row, and we had 2 months of training before we entered another race to go across the Atlantic, and that's what we did. So 2 months later, we went back to La Gomera, and we were the only women in the race, the only women, right? In fact, before my mum and I, only 16 women in the entire world had ever attempted to row any ocean. We got into our wooden rowing boat and we headed out, right? And I was very, very nervous. You can just imagine, right? You're going out into the Atlantic Ocean, you're not sure what you're going to see. It's really uncertain and a bit scary. And I was crying quite a bit. I mean, it was really embarrassing, especially for my mum. But we rowed out to the start of the race, and my mum said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to try and look good in our wooden rowing boat, get across the horizon and have a cup of tea. And that's what we did. And then we were seasick for an entire month, right? So you imagine the entire time that you've been in lockdown, just being sick every day, right? But you know what? It was really cool in a weird way, because it encouraged the wildlife around our boats, right? So we had one tiny little stripy fish that came swimming past our boat one day, and then he went off to his friends and said, the vomit over there is really nice, okay? And they brought loads of little tiny stripy fish, and there were brown fish and spotty fish, and we called them happy flappy fish. We had dolphins, we had whales, and it was so exciting to see so many creatures, right? If you want to row across the Atlantic really quickly, you've got to row all the way around the clock, okay? So our plan was to do 2 hours rowing and then 2 hours sleeping in the cabin, and we'd swap over. But it's really difficult rowing at night because you're all on your own in the dark, and you've got a really sore bottom, you've got blisters on your hands. The stars are amazing, right? When you look up into the sky, you can see all the constellations. So incredible. You can see the moon in all its phases. Do you know what that means? It means that you can see it from when it's a little tiny little slither to a huge full moon, and it's like you're rowing on a dark day. It's quite incredible. And then sometimes there's no moon at all, and it's like you're rowing through space, right? Because all the stars reflect in the ocean around you. And there's something called phosphorescence, which is like I think it's a plankton actually, that when you pull the water out, it stimulates it to all kind of glitter and stuff, and it all falls off like diamonds from your oars. It's quite amazing. And you can hear the whales singing around your boat. Kind of cool, right? So can you imagine what it might be like inside that wooden rowing boat for the amount of time that it took my mum and I to get across? Well, we had to stockpile, right? So what did we stockpile on? Loo rolls. Yeah, we stockpiled on loo rolls. Okay, we did that. We also stockpiled on chocolate. Chocolate. And the reason why is because when you're rowing so much all the time, you're losing a lot of energy. So you need lots of kind of sweet treats and really high calorie stuff to kind of keep your energy up. And also we stockpiled on stuff like this, right? Does anybody know what this might be? Yeah, I know it says scrambled eggs with ham and peppers, right? But it's actually something called dehydrated food. So what they've done is they sucked all the water out of the food. It's kind of like space food, right? And in fact, they probably would have taken something like this up to space. And what you need to do is you add water to it. Now, if you're adding water to this, where do you think the water might be coming from if you're in the middle of the ocean? Yeah, right, the ocean. But what's wrong with it? It's really salty. Yeah, it's really salty. And also there's other stuff in it like bacteria and fish poo. And guess what? Your poo. Yeah, your poo is in the water. And the last thing you want to do is scoop it up and put it in your dinner. So we had something called a water maker. And what the water maker does is it sucks out water from the ocean and it takes it through a fine filter. And by the time it comes out the other side, it's just pure H2O. So just pure water with nothing in it, no minerals, nothing. It tastes pretty soapy actually, it's not very nice. So that's what we lived on. We lived on chocolate, lots of chocolate, dehydrated food, and yeah, good fun, and seeing lots of wildlife. In fact, one night we were inside our cabin, which is about the size of a two-man tent. This is a little bit bigger, so it's not quite this big. But when you're lying inside it, when you sit up, you hit your head against the ceiling. It's that small, right? We were lying inside our cabin in the middle of the ocean, and we heard this noise. Boom, 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 boom. Mum said, go and have a look. So I opened the door and I looked out, and on top of the roof there was a little bird. And because we've got solar panels on top of our roof, so the solar panels charge all our electrical equipment. So our satellite phone, which I've talked about before, the GPS, which is a bit like a sat nav but at sea, right? Our water maker, which of course I've also mentioned, right? So the solar panels are on the top, and this little bird is going boop, 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 boop. He's walking up the top of the solar panels, and then the boat tips and back down he goes again, right? How crazy. And then one afternoon he came and he sat on my foot, right? And a few days later I looked out on my mum, and she was in her full wet weather gear. So imagine, you know, have you seen sailors when they've got their full wet weather gear on? You can barely see them, not like this, you can only see this bit, their face, right? And there he is, sat on her arm. And I didn't have to see her smile, right? I couldn't see it anyway. I saw it in her eyes, right? There he was, sat on her arm. Eventually he sat on my head, which is kind of cool. And he became Ship's Bird. We found out what he was called because we had a book, right? So we looked in the book, and he's called a brown noddy. And that's what he was. He was brown, and he had a kind of like a white stripe down his beak. Very severe, a bit kind of serious. But he stayed with us practically all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, which is kind of cool. And when we got nearer to the other side, there were loads of noddies, and one day he'd flown off and we didn't have a chance to say goodbye. But my mum and I rowed into a place called Barbados, which is in the Caribbean, so it's very hot. I'll give you a secret, right? Because it's so hot where we were rowing, most of the time we rowed naked. Yes, we rowed naked, right? And why wouldn't you? You're with your mum, right? So we got closer to Barbados and we rowed into the end. It took us 4 months, 106 days at sea in a tiny wooden rowing boat, just me and my mum, right? And you know what we did? We talked about food a lot. We laughed a lot. We were silly a lot. Have you been silly a lot recently? Right, we went mad a lot. We went a bit crazy, a bit doolally, said silly things, did silly things, got angry sometimes too, and a bit kind of grumpy and depressed. But that's how it was at sea. In fact, the ocean is an amazing metaphor for life, because sometimes it's flat and still and calm, and sometimes it's wavy and big and scary. And in fact, I've rowed across the Atlantic twice, yeah? So the first time I went with my mum, the second time I went with 4 of the girls, and it was the worst weather in the Atlantic for 200 years, right? So we went out because we wanted to be the first women's 4 and get the fastest time and get a world record, right? And we went out in our wooden rowing boat, and we faced huge waves, bigger than 2-story houses, and massive winds. In fact, we saw the tail end of a hurricane, which is the worst storm you can have at sea, and 2 tropical storms. It was really proper scary. And one afternoon, Jo, who was on my team, she slipped and she hurt her back, and she stopped rowing and she started whinging. Who's been whinging recently? Yeah, me too. I've been whinging recently. She didn't want to be there anymore. She wanted to get off the boat. And it was so sad having to talk to her and try and get her and persuade her to stay, but she didn't want to. And so we called up something called a support yacht. So the yacht kind of looks after the whole fleet of rowing boats, and they came and they took her off the boat and disqualified us from the race. And it was proper sad to see her go. And also it was a dream of mine to get a world record, to be the first women's 4, and it didn't happen. But you know what? We kept on rowing. And then one afternoon, I didn't tell you, but a huge wave sheared the rudder off the back of our boat. Does anybody know what a rudder does? Yeah, right. It helps to steer the boat, right? So we haven't got a rudder. So what we do is we get some ropes and some t-shirts and a little water bottle and stick it off the back of the boat to help steer us in the waves, right? And one afternoon, right, a shark starts attacking the back of the boat. Craziness, right? There's a lot of screaming. We hide inside the cabin because we think if the shark can't see us, the shark can't eat us, right? So that's what we do. We get in the cabin, and as skipper, I nominate one of the girls to get out of the cabin and go and grab a knife. No, she didn't kill the shark. What she did is she cut the ropes. Remember the ropes with the t-shirts on? She cut them off and it all went quiet. We have never rowed so fast in all our lives. But you know what? Without a rudder and without our friend Jo, we came 3rd from last. and disqualified from the race. But what I was really, really pleased to see was my friend Jo decided she wanted to do it again. And she did. And she went in a boat called Unfinished Business. And she rowed across in the fastest time for a women's team, a women's fours team, right? So she got a world record. But I didn't tell you this. My mum and I found out that we had got a world record too. So I'm going to show you it. Here we go. It's because we were the first mother and daughter to row any ocean, and because it's the first, it can't be beaten. Kind of cool, right? So since my ocean rows, I have been on loads of different adventures. I've been to the Amazon and eaten grubs. I've seen these amazing hummingbird nests in the Amazon, right? They are tiny, teeny, tiny, and they're up in a tree, and they're called teacup hummingbirds because their nests are so little and teacuppy, right? So we saw those. We saw three-toed sloths. Okay, we've been to the Galapagos Islands. Who wants to go there? Yeah, pretty cool, right? So we swam with seals in the Galapagos, and I had my snorkel on and my goggles, and all the people on the boat could hear was me going because it was so exciting, and they had whiskers like this. It was really cool. And there's Galapagos penguins, which are the smallest penguins in the world. So cute, right? It's been an amazing to be an adventurer. It's taken me to places that I've never known before. Places like St Helena, which is down in the middle of the Atlantic, right down the bottom near South Africa, right? And there's a tortoise called Jonathan, and he's the oldest living land creature in the world. He's 186, and I was able to feed him. How cool was that? And I know that at the moment you're probably feeling that you would love to go on an adventure, and an adventure from home is kind of cool, but it's not as good as kind of swimming with, you know, seals in the Galapagos. Well, there will be a time when you can go on an adventure, a proper one, that's outside in the fresh air doing cool and amazing things. But there's so much for you to learn. And I haven't told you this either, but I used to be a brownie, a guide, and a young leader. And it gave me all the tools I needed to go around the world. So I really hope you're having the most amazing day today. And I'm so pleased and proud to be part of it. Have a great festival. And if you're interested in getting in touch, send me your pictures of your own adventures at home, right? Then get in touch on Twitter. It's at Sally Kettle. I'm on Instagram as well. And I will definitely reply to you. Have a great day. See you soon, I'm sure.